Go live in 8 seconds, so I guess everyone can mute themselves, except for Damien.
All right, good morning and welcome. And if you're in another part of the world, it may be good evening or good night to you. We are delighted to have you joining us for this What Works Global Summit 2022. And you have joined the nutrition section, in which we will have 4 exciting presentations to share with you. And so, what we're going to do now is we're going to prepare to bring our speakers on. And so, we are going to invite our first speaker, who is Charlotte Lane. She'll be presenting to us this morning, and she'll, of course, tell us her topic and tell us a little bit about where she's from, and then we'll get right into the presentation. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. Hopefully my slides are coming through. I think they're there now. So I am Charlotte Lane. I'm a senior evaluation specialist at 3IE. That's the International Initiative for Impact Evaluation. I am based in DC, and what I'm talking about today is our work on food systems and nutrition, and this was supported by GIZ and BMZ. The innovative approach that we wanted to take with this was to leverage a living food systems and nutrition evidence gap map in order to be able to produce rapid synthesis products. So what we did was we started by identifying the universe of evidence, looking at interventions within the food system and their impact on food security and nutrition outcomes. Once we had identified all of the impact evaluations and systematic reviews of impact evaluations on that topic, we were able to use the pre-identified set of studies in order to conduct rapid synthesis. The reason that we're taking this approach is that we have found funders and implementers have these really short project cycles where they need to make decisions quickly, and we want to get them the best available evidence in order to make those decisions. So what I'm showing here is the timeline for our continuous evidence mapping process. Back in May 2020, we ran the original search for this evidence gap map, and we identified over 140,000 articles to screen. By January 2021, we had published the first version of the map with just over 2,000 articles in it. And since then, we've been conducting this continuous cycle of searching for new articles, screening them, and adding them to the online map. And we've been getting better and better and faster at this. So you can see those dots are getting closer together as we're getting the ball rolling and picking up momentum with this. So far, we have added over 200 articles to the map, which means that 10% of the studies currently included in the map were added during the update period. And I think that just shows the importance of continually updating the map, because it could really quickly become out of date, and then all of the synthesis products based on the map would also be out of date. This is what the online map actually looks like. It's publicly available, and it's organized with interventions down the rows and outcomes along the columns. Then within each cell, we have the impact evaluations and systematic reviews that consider that intervention and outcome. In the online version of the map, you can click on the cell and it'll take you to links of the included studies. Right now, there's 2,219 articles in the map, and we're going to be publishing a new update in the new year. So far, we have identified 2 key areas for rapid evidence synthesis. So this was in conversation with partners. We discussed where they needed evidence and they needed it now. And then we produced these 2 slightly different rapid synthesis products. So for the first one, we conducted a rapid evidence assessment on women's empowerment within the food system. And we also did a systematic review on the effects of fiscal policies for supporting a healthy diet. For the rapid evidence assessment, we relied solely on the studies that were already in the EGM. So we selected a single row there, and we synthesized the studies that were in a single row of the evidence gap map. We made sure to maintain high standards of rigor by doing double data extraction and meta-analysis wherever that was possible. We also searched for qualitative work, looking at the interventions that were included in our quantitative analysis. And this allowed us to understand barriers and facilitators to impact in those interventions. We found that women's empowerment interventions can be effective at improving food security, affordability, and availability. For the fiscal policy systematic review, we took a slightly different approach. So we did run a new search for that work to identify studies in high-income countries. Like I said, the map only looks at low and middle-income countries. But we were able to leverage the results from the previous screening for the EGM in order to accelerate the screening process for our fiscal policies systematic review. We also made sure to maintain high standards of rigor by doing things like double data extraction and meta-analysis wherever that was possible. We looked at barriers and facilitators to impact for this work as well, but we only looked at that within the included impact evaluations. We didn't run a new search. What we found with this work was that the effects of taxes and subsidies on behavior and on diet quality are really ambiguous. There's just not that much evidence actually on this topic. And even though there's not like a strong take-home message there, just knowing that there's not that much evidence is in and of itself an important finding. So I think these two different products show different approaches that can be taken in order to use living evidence gap maps in order to develop rapid synthesis products. The idea here is that once we understand the universe of evidence on a specific topic, we're able to quickly produce responsive synthesis in a way that aligns with the rapid program cycles that funders and implementers are actually working with. So currently, we are trying to think about other ways to use the EGM in order to produce rapid responsive synthesis, thinking about how you can do targeted synthesis on outcomes or populations or specific themes. So we could look at synthesis related to climate change and food systems work. So there's a lot of new creative ways that we can use a living evidence mapping process to more quickly develop evidence synthesis. And we only have a very short amount of time for this. So that's my contact information. And I have links to the various outputs that we've made for this work. So sorry, I'm going to stop sharing. And I think, Damien, do I pass it back to you?
Yes. Yes, thank you very much, Charlotte. That was an excellent presentation, and I'm excited about the work that you're doing. I'm checking the live Q&A to see if we have any questions for you. I don't see any at the moment, and so I'll take the prerogative as chair to ask you the first one. Have you looked on priority questions, for example, from institutions like the WHO, and how might your EGM be able to respond to some of those questions and kind of create a map, as it were, of not only the existing evidence, but the questions they may be able to answer. So I know a lot of the questions that are being asked now in terms of the World Health Organization, at least the nutrition section, is on biofortification of foods, particularly in food insecure environments where they are being affected by climate change. Have you taken a look at some of the questions that are out there that your work may be able to answer?
I think that's a great question. We haven't directly mapped it to, say, the action tracks coming out of the UN Food Systems Summit, but that would be pretty easy for us to do that mapping and linking. When we are figuring out where to do the synthesis, most of that is based off of discussions about questions that we're getting. We're trying to make that policy relevant. So the fiscal policies work, WHO right now recommends taxes on SSBs. So we're looking at key priorities in the international community, even if we haven't exactly done that mapping.
Thank you. And then let me ask you another question. In terms of accessing your map and accessing the evidence that you have amalgamated, so let's say I'm trying to answer, for example, the question you've just raised about sugar sweetened beverage taxation as a fiscal way of dealing with managing obesity, for example, in a dollar sense. How do I access your work, your map, and the evidence that you have garnered? Is this an open access library in which we can uh, get that information?
Yeah, it's open access on our website. I had the screenshot of it. If there's a place I can chat to the attendees, I can drop the link in the chat as well. I lost volume for you.
Sorry, you should be able to put that in the discussion forum, and I think all should be able to see that if they're in the discussion forum. Uh, I think that's the best place to put them, I think.
Okay, great. I will definitely do that. We have the map, and then also those two briefs that I showed on that topic are publicly available now.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We're now going to go to our second presenter. Our second presenter is Edward. Edward is going to be presenting to us on his work done through the International Center for Evaluation and Development. And so, Edward, we're going to ask you to share your screen now and talk to us a little bit about who you are and what you're presenting.
Okay. I hope you can hear me now.
We can. Thank you.
No, thank you. So I am Edward Kusi Asafo-Agyei. I'm a research associate with the International Center for Evaluation and Development, the first African-based M&E think tank, and I'm based in Ghana.
Great.
But today
Edward,
we're going to
go ahead to do full screen for us.
Yes.
Thank you.
Now we are going to look at the impact of physical infrastructure on nutritious diet, women economic empowerment, and gender equality in low and middle income countries. Our focus is on the theory of change. And there are other co-authors as well for this. You can see them listed. The goal of this project actually is to enhance or to ensure that there is improvement in the nutrition and empowerment of women, especially in LMICs. And so we decided to look at the pathways by which infrastructure could lead to the outcomes of interest. You know that infrastructure in particular is very, very significant, important for attainment of the SDGs. But do the physical infrastructures actually have a link to nutrition and women empowerment? Does the literature actually support or provide linkages that support this assertion? And that is why we decided to put out the theory of change. So we do this by first identifying the basic infrastructure needs of low-income consumers, especially. And then we identified four of them: production, post-production, distribution, and information. Then at every level, we describe a pathway or a mechanism that will explain the process by which the intervention could lead to the outcome of interest. Now, so you find that for every category of infrastructure, we're going to describe some two basic theories of change, one linking to nutritious diet outcomes, the other linking to women empowerment outcomes. But for the purpose of this presentation, and it's a work in progress, we are going to outline the broad framework, and that is going to be used to explain. So I show you the broad framework from here. I hope this is visible and can be seen as well. So you can see from the framework that there are output or infrastructures that have been categorized, 4 of them: production, post-production, distribution, and information. And for each of these, we identify and describe some pathways. For example, if you take production infrastructure, you can see we have the consumption pathway. And through that pathway, the infrastructure affects the productivity, and then that ultimately also leads to dietary diversity, food availability, and consumption, which certainly leads to nutritious diet. We should say, therefore, that we identify some adverse effects. For example, for the same production infrastructure, if you look at the socioeconomic pathway, you have loss of economic opportunity. Most of the women lost their access to their lands to farm due to construction of certain infrastructure within the community. Now, and this ultimately led to some outcomes such as time use and efficiency. Others also affected their income, which indirectly or invariably affect the nutrition and empowerment of women. Now, what is significant about this chart, and that is worth mentioning, is that you can see some of the linkages, we mean the arrows, are shown boldened, and others are very faint. Now, those that are faint are ones that so far from the literature reviewed, we have not been able to lay hands on so many literature that is asserting to that fact. So it means that where there is a thin arrow, it means that the literature in that section is very scarce. Probably we have found less than 5. Whenever we find less than 5, we use the thin arrow. And for the broad linkages, it means that there's certainly more than 5 up to a number of them that can be shown. So some critical assumptions has to be in place for the pathways to lead to the outcomes of interest. And we describe some as education on nutrition and hygienic practices, because the provision of infrastructure alone does not lead to nutritious diets or women empowered. There needs to be some education for the women and the populace as well on nutrition and hygiene. Technology also needs to be available, and it should be accessible, and they should be able to operate it. Well, there should be also gender mainstreaming in the construction of rural infrastructure. So people do not just put up infrastructure just because it is needed by these LICs, but of course, gender should be mainstream. They should consider gender aspects. And advocacy on gender equality is also very paramount. Gender equality and women empowerment should be scaled up, as well as social, cultural, religious norms and institutions that need to be modified to support gender equality. We conclude by saying that the linkages between physical infrastructure and nutrition is complex and very dynamic, and there are diverse linkages between the infrastructure and the outcomes of interest, whereas some are showing a lot more in literature. For example, there is quite a number of literature showing irrigation infrastructure to nutritious diet. But quite apart from that, there is very little on the other typologies of infrastructure. So we recommend that a lot more studies should be commissioned into this to examine this relationship carefully, and a lot more programs and projects should also be carried out, and with special emphasis on nutritious diet and women empowerment, so that low-income consumers in these LMICs, their nutrition could be enhanced. This is our contact information, the president, the research director, and myself. I thank you for making time for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edward, for the work you are doing and the work of your team. I think it is really important work. When I read your abstract, I was really intrigued and had a few questions for you. But let me see if there's any questions in the live Q&A from our attendees. Haven't seen any just now. So I'm going to take the opportunity to ask you, were you able in your work to do any graphical depiction of the theory of change or a logic model framework, so to speak, of how, for example, the physical infrastructure pathway to each of the outcome that you've looked on. So, for example, the nutrition, healthy diets as one of the outcomes you mentioned, women's empowerment. Were you able to create these kind of a pathway maps so we could visualize what the pathway and the factors influencing or that comes as mediators or moderators between the relationship of the physical environment and your outcomes?
Yes. So it's like I said, a work in progress, and this is the channel and the path that we have taken for every infrastructure. We're going to have the clear pathway pictorially that shows how that infrastructure leads to the nutritious diet outcome, and how the structure could lead to the women's empowerment outcome. It is upon having all these for the various typologies of infrastructure that we identify, that we make them into the broad framework that I displayed during the presentation. We have that in progress.
Excellent. And I think that would be useful for those who are conducting research work, be it primary research or systematic reviews in this area, that your work will serve as a guide in terms of developing and refining the questions that they're asking. So I think this is an excellent contribution to the literature pool, and I look forward to seeing and hearing more about your work.
Sure. Thank you for that.
See no questions in the live Q&A. We're going to move to our third presenter. Our third presenter is Tao, and Tao is going to be presenting to us his work on something that is really interesting to me, red meat intake for human health outcomes. And he's presenting on a umbrella review. And so we're going to take a look at that. Tao, you'll tell us a little bit more about where you're from and what you're doing. And please share your screen.
Okay. Thank you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I think I still see Edward. Do you mind stop sharing your screen at the moment so we can get Tao's screen share up? We still have Edward's screen.
Okay.
Can you share now? You should be able to share. Right? Excellent.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Nian. I'm from Center for Evidence-Based Medicine of Lanzhou University of China. The topic I'm going to report today is red meat intake for human health outcomes, an umbrella review. In 2015, the International Agency for Research on Cancer classified red meat consumption as possibly carcinogenic to humans. based on limited but strong mechanistic evidence of carcinogenic effects. Biochemical studies have also suggested that increasing oxidation and nitralization reactions during human digestion may linking the consumption of cooked meat to colorectal cancer. But the guide, sorry. But the guidelines published in the Annals of International Medicine in 2019 recommend that the diet could continue their consumption of processed red meat and processed meat. Also noted that only one of the 5 reviews, including randomization trials, while the rest rely on observation epidemiological diet. As for the one review that included randomized trials, many were funded by the meat industry, and one of them discussed the health outcome in red meat and processed meat. The result are unconvincing. To overcome this knowledge gap, we synthesized the evidence in this field through an umbrella review. Umbrella review is a new method of evidence-based medicine analysis. It is high-level medical evidence analysis medicine step on systematic review and meta-analysis summarize the evidence from multiple studies. We found the PRISMA guidelines for reporting the umbrella review, inclusion and exclusion criteria were developed using the PICOS principle. The two authors independently searched the literature and extract the data, and the disagreement was resolved by the third source. Also, the quality of the including literature was assessed by Amsterdam 2. In the including systematic review were described quantitatively or qualitatively. The data were recombined by data software. The result of meta-analysis shows that excessive intake of red meat increased the risk of colon cancer, and high red meat intake was associated with increasing risk of rectal cancer, but the difference was not statistically significant. Quantitative results show that the incidence of type 2 diabetes, no kidneys, lymphoma, and gastric cancer were increased by red meat intake. By the cardiovascular mortality was not statistically significant. Inclusion. This umbrella review shows that the health effects of red meat should not be understimulated. Red meat intake may be an influential factor in human nutrition and health. However, the quality of systematic reviews included in this paper is not high. The overall application of this research evidence needs to careful. The authenticity and reliability of the results of the study still needs further validation. Thanks for your listening. This is the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much for that, Tao. I noticed, let me just check the live Q&A to see if we have any questions for... Great, we have lots of your colleagues wishing you a presentation. Let me take the chairman's privilege to ask you a couple of questions. I noticed the strong conclusion that there's no link between red meat consumption and cardiovascular disease. However, there is some indication that red meat consumption from your data that you have shown might influence type 2 diabetes, and type 2 diabetes indirectly may be a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. So how do you explain the potential then for red meat consumption via other metabolic processes to be linked to cardiovascular disease?
Okay. Let me see.
I am suggesting that there might be an indirect link between that red meat consumption and cardiovascular disease via another metabolic condition such as type 2 diabetes.
Yes.
And you know, that's something that you may want to explore further. You may want to explore further when you look at the data continually. And so that's not something you necessarily have to answer now, but you can think about that and try to include that in your mapping or in your further analyses. There was also a high level of heterogeneity as noticed in your square. Yeah. Do you have any explanation for those that heterogeneity, that high level of heterogeneity, particularly with the outcome diabetes, and then I think the last one was colorectal cancer?
We just merged this. We just merged this. And and anastical consistency. We
if I might just jump in here to say, one of the things you may want to do when you're looking at, because I'm looking at the data now, and it says, the I-square is relatively high for incidence of type 2 diabetes and for gastric cancer, which are about 67% for the latter. Perhaps, in future, when you present this data, you can offer up some recommendation or suggestion or limitation, as it were, as to why these I-squares were so high. Is it related to population? Is it differences in the population that the review included, or is it differences in some element of your PICO, your question? So I'll leave that with you as a recommendation, as something you may want to do is to try to explain or state up the limitations that may exist for the level of heterogeneity that is being seen in the work that you are presenting.
Okay, thank you.
We are still waiting on our fourth presenter, and that person is not on yet. They are still having trouble with the device they're trying to join with. So we're going to give that a few more minutes. In the meantime, I do note that we have a few attendees, and we're going to ask if you have any questions or comments for our presenters, that you can type those into the live Q&A, and our presenters would be more than happy to respond to those. Okay, so we have one question here from Lying Zhu, which asks, what is the difference between umbrella systematic review and systematic review?
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Umbrella review and reviews of previously published systematic review or meta-analysis. Therefore, they represent one of the highest levels of evidence simple science currently available, and I become increasing influential in biomedical literature. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that response. I think, there was a time when systematic reviews were novel, and because of the novelty of systematic reviews, it was enough to have just systematic reviews. But then as the wheels got churning and we were producing so many systematic reviews on a question or a theme, then it became necessary for us to have what was referred to at the time overview of reviews, and in some circles considered umbrella reviews, where we are actually synthesizing the evidence from systematic reviews to paint one picture for a thematic area or a broad clinical or other types of questions that might be asked. So they are, as Tao says, becoming increasingly popular, because again, a lot of times policymakers are looking to answer broad questions as opposed to narrow ones. And there are times when policymakers may be looking to answer narrow questions. And so the overview of review, review, are increasingly important to answering those questions.
Maybe since we have time, I was just going to say in our map, we have 20 systematic reviews on fortification. which just shows it might be a good idea to make one review looking at all of those to come up with a single, stronger take-home message than all 20 separate things.
Yeah, I think that is really important. One of the caution or things I'd like to say when we do these overview of reviews or these umbrella reviews is to ensure that the systematic review is a living one where we have stakeholder input. We oftentimes as scientists get carried away in conducting these reviews and overview of reviews on a solely academic or scientific basis without taking into consideration the end users, be it policymakers, clinicians, or just the layperson. And I think, especially if we're going to spend so much time to do an overview of review, we should make sure that it is addressing some relevant question that exists either in the policy world or the practice world, so that the information we're putting together can be so useful. And this is why I think your work, Charlotte, is so important, because you are preparing us to respond quickly to questions from policymakers, from practitioners, because you have already done the work in creating this living, breathing gap map, so we can go and look at what the evidence is and what is needed.
We also make sure to have a external advisory group involved in developing the mapping frameworks so that it's organized in a way that makes sense to implementers and funders who we want to be using it. And we developed our framework for this work based on the theory of change that the high-level panel of experts published in, I think it was 2017, updated by IFPRI in 2019. So just making sure that our framework speaks to real people and shows things in a way that big organizations in the field can relate to, so that they can find the information that they need, not just us as the academics, like you were saying.
Great. Now, if somebody is listening and they're wondering, how do I, let's say I don't want to do this evidence gap map in nutrition, and I wanted to do it, let's say, for example, in health disparities or racial health disparities, is there any methods that you could point us to in terms of how do we start in creating or generating an evidence gap map?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. The first thing that we do is develop that framework. So thinking about really your PICOS and what are you trying to map. Often that process takes about half the time of the whole piece of work. And really that's what sets you up for success in this work. If you define your universe of evidence that you're looking at really well and really clearly, that's how you will be able to make sure that you find what you want and you don't end up with things that you don't want in your map. So if you're thinking about something like racial disparities in health, you would want to be really careful about what do you mean by disparities? What types of interventions are you thinking about in reducing disparities? Would it only be medical interventions, or would you be thinking about social type interventions? And just be really careful in writing out your interventions as well as definitions, examples. We often identify a set of studies that we would and wouldn't include within each of those categories to make sure that upfront we know what we're doing before we even run that search.
Great. I think that's fantastic guidance. And I know we have, lots of guidance out there on how to do theory of change. We have guidance out there on how to do gap maps, and perhaps I've not been searching enough, but I've not gap maps. We have evidence. We have guidance out there on how to do scoping reviews, how to do systematic reviews, how to do the different things, theory of change, but I've not come across a comprehensive paper on doing evidence gap maps. And perhaps some of the folks I know at 3IE may have that. Some of them have left 3IE, like U Waddington is no longer at 3IE, but I know Bertha is probably still there. And so some of that work, because you've been doing this exclusively for a long time, may be a series on how to do. It would be a great body of work that can be published so that, you know, most of us who are struggling in this area could find that as a guidance document.
You just gave us a whole new set of work to do, Damien. I think that's a great idea. As far as I know, we don't actually have formal guidance. You know, BITA has several published peer review papers about how to do systematic reviews. We have guidance on how to do rapid evidence assessments, but I'm not aware of guidance specifically for evidence mapping. I did see that my colleague Miriam is listening in, so if she disagrees with me, maybe she can put a link in the chat. But the process is generally pretty similar to a systematic review, just stopping short of the actual synthesis portion. But you're right, it would be great to set that up in a more clear framework with the steps lined out.
Excellent. We have just about 13 minutes to go, and we can end early. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go around and ask if any of the presenters have any last bit that they want to share with us on their work, and then we are going to bring the session to a close.
I've been talking a lot, so I'll give my other presenters a moment to say any last word.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
It's nothing.
Let's see. Go ahead, Tom. I was trying to get you on spotlight. There we go. Okay. Edward, do you have anything for us?
Sorry,
I think, yeah, sorry. I think I'm okay for now. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, maybe just to wrap up, I wanted to say that if people have specific policy questions that they are interested in that are related to the map, we are always looking for information about what the most pressing questions in the field are. Like Damien hinted to, this shouldn't be something where the academics who are slightly removed are the ones deciding where the work goes. So if other people who are engaged in the area have questions, shoot me an email. We obviously can't just go do synthesis all the time, but we are interested in knowing where the interest lies.
Great. Thank you very much to all our presenters. And I just want to thank our attendees. Just want to say thank you very much for joining the What Works Global Summit 2022. And this is our sub-session on nutrition. We had three exciting presentations that showcase work from various parts of the world. And we are just super happy that you could join us this morning. We're gonna close our session now and just want to acknowledge our sponsors. As you can see them here on our screen, we just want to acknowledge the tremendous contribution that they've made to make this event possible. Many years ago, I attended my first, and I think it was the first, What Works Global Summit in London, and I'm looking forward to the days when we get back together in person. But Events Air has been a wonderful platform to work with, and I think it has done us tremendous good to be able to still come together and share what works and at least understand how what works work. So thank you very much, and do enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you, Tao.
Oh, okay.